On the 7th of July 1865, a group of men and one woman were led out into a courtyard of the Arsenal Penitentiary in Washington, D.C. for their executions. A huge gallows had been created to condemn them all on at once, and these were those who were executed for their involvement in the assassination of American President Abraham Lincoln. Amongst them was Mary Surratt, the owner of a boarding house, which had been used to store weapons and for meetings which were held between the conspirators, and also Lewis Powell, a man who was just 21 when he was executed that day. But alongside them stood a German-American repairman who had been deeply ingrained with the plot to assassinate the president. George Atzerodt was tasked with taking out Vice President Andrew Johnson, and this was a role assigned to him. However, he lost his nerve and bottled it, but he was still sentenced to death for conspiracy, regardless of the fact he did not carry out any action. But what happened with his execution? Join us today as we look at the execution of the coward of the Lincoln conspiracy, and as always, to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. George Andreas Atzerodt was actually born in the Prussian province of Saxony on the 13th of June 1835. When he was just 8 years old, his parents moved to America, and the family settled in Maryland. He later, when he became an adult, was involved in opening a carriage repair business based in Port Tobacco. He was described by others as a good-natured kind of fellow, and little at the time suggested that he would become someone who was involved in one of the most shocking assassinations in American history. He could not speak English fluently, and spoke in broken language, and he did struggle with this. However, during the English Civil War, Atzerodt then became involved in helping a number of Confederate agents and spies. He helped John Surratt cross a river, and Surratt then invited him to Washington, where for some time he stayed with the Surratts inside of Mary's boarding house, which would later become important to the plots to assassinate Lincoln. But he was actually thrown out of the boarding house, as he was drinking far too heavily, and was consuming alcohol in his room. But through the Surratts, he met with John Wilkes Booth, the man who fired the fatal shot into Lincoln that night. Wilkes Booth persuaded him to get involved in a plan to kidnap Lincoln, and then hold him in Virginia to be later exchanged for Confederate prisoners of war. Atzerodt agreed to this, and he met with other conspirators at Gautier's restaurant, and they discussed the plot further. He later confessed that he joined the conspiracy to kidnap the president willingly, but then the nature of the operation switched to become an assassination plot. Specifically in these plans, Wilkes Booth wanted to also hit a number of senior government ministers and officials. George Atzerodt was ordered to kill Vice President Andrew Johnson. This was to take place on the 14th of April 1865, and that morning he booked into room 126 at Kirkwood House in Washington, the very same place where Johnston was staying. That evening, Wilkes Booth shot Lincoln at Ford's Theatre, and Lewis Powell, another conspirator, attacked Secretary of State William Seward with the intention of killing him. But that evening, George Atzerodt began to drink inside the hotel bar, and he drank more and more, to the point where he was heavily intoxicated. He then lost his nerve to go through with the attack, and he spent that evening walking through the streets of Washington, completely drunk and out of it. He had been given a knife to carry out the attack, but Atzerodt threw this away in a gutter, but some woman reported this to the police after she saw him doing this. Atzerodt, however, made another mistake earlier that night, as he asked the bartender where the vice president was, and following Lincoln's assassination, a hotel worker reported this. He claimed that a suspicious-looking man in a grey coat had been in the hotel looking for the vice president. A member of the military police force visited the hotel and searched Atzerodt's room, and he found that the bed had not been slept in, and under the pillow was a loaded revolver, and between the sheets and the mattress was a large bowie knife. Further evidence was gathered, and with this he was seen as one of the prime suspects. George Atzerodt was arrested on the 20th of April, whilst he was visiting his cousin. His trial took place on the 1st of May 1865, and it was claimed by his attorney that he wanted to show that George Atzerodt was a constitutional coward, that if he had been assigned the duty of assassinating the vice president, he could never have done it, and that from his known cowardice, Booth probably did not assign him any such duty. But this did him no good. He was closely allied with the other conspirators, and other witnesses claimed They noticed his suspicious behaviour that night around the hotel. George Atzerodt was found guilty and he was sentenced to death. Following his conviction, he offered a full confession to a minister who comforted him in his cell. He admitted to attending meetings to plan the abduction of President Lincoln, but he then claimed that these meetings then discussed the plans to assassinate Lincoln. He did say that he heard about the shooting, that it would occur 2 hours before it did, and he said that he was overestimated correctly by Wilkes Booth for his ability to assassinate Vice President Johnson. George Atzerodt had been condemned to death alongside Mary Surratt, Lewis Powell and David Herold, and they were all to be executed by hanging on the gallows. 3 others were sentenced to periods of hard labour. Specifically for their executions, a 12-foot gallows had been created specially for the executions in the old Arsenal Penitentiary on the 7th of July 1865. It was a hot day, around 36 degrees Celsius, and the condemned made their way to the gallows. They passed a number of cheap pine coffins and shallow graves that had been dug for them. It must have been scary for those 4 condemned, and they were forced to climb the gallows, and they had heard it being tested the night before whilst they were in their cells. As the 4 were led onto the scaffold, the noose was placed around their necks, along with a white hood which was placed over their heads. Many people were there to watch, and they believed that Mary Surratt would be saved or be given a stay of execution, but this was not the case for her. The last rites were administered to each of the condemned shortly after 1:30 p.m. on the afternoon of the 7th of July 1865. The trapdoors then crashed open, with them having been shuffled over them, and they went to their deaths. Atzerodt screamed, "May we meet in another world," however within minutes he was dead. His body was left hanging for 25 minutes before he was cut down and then was buried in a pre-dug grave. He was then interred later inside a different cemetery in Washington. George Atzerodt's ability to take the life of the Vice President was doubted, and it was doubted with good reason, as he could never carry out the attack. He was a drunk and someone who halted the conspiracy, getting their end goal of bringing down the major players in the government. He was seen as a weak man, and he left many clues as to his intentions on the night of Lincoln's shooting, especially as he was even seen throwing a knife down a drain. Despite him not attacking anyone, he was someone who was linked to the plot, and he knew about what was going to happen, and did nothing to stop it. He even advocated it, and intended at times in his mind to assassinate Vice President Johnson, but could not go through with it, instead turning to the bottle, and he may have drank himself to give himself a push or some courage, but he instead, rather than carry out the attack, continued to drink the night away. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.